Episode 7, Yamato vs. Iowa. Battleships of the Pacific War. The End of the Dreadnought Era Part 1. Little-known facts before we begin. Before this episode begins, here are 5 documented facts about these ships that most people have never heard. Fact number 1, the Yamato's existence was classified so secretly that most Japanese sailors serving on other ships did not know the vessel existed at all. Its name did not appear in official Japanese Navy registers available to the public until after the war. The secrecy was enforced so strictly that workers who built the ship at the Kure Naval Arsenal were rotated in shifts specifically to prevent any single worker from understanding the full scale of the project. This is documented in the post-war interrogation. Reports compiled by the United States Strategic Bombing Survey in 1945 and 1946. Fact number 2, when the Iowa-class battleships were being designed in 1938 and 1939, the United States Navy deliberately widened their beam to 56 feet 4 inches, specifically so they could fit through the existing Panama Canal locks. This single engineering constraint shaped the entire hull form of what became the most powerful American battleships ever built. The Panama Canal limitation is documented in the Bureau of Ships Design Records held at the National Archives in College Park, Maryland. Fact number 3, the Yamato was struck by a torpedo from the American submarine Skate in December 1943, but the damage was repaired, and the event was not reported in Japanese public communications. The Yamato spent a significant portion of the war anchored at Truk and later at Linga Roads, far from combat, because Japan could not afford to lose the fuel required to operate a ship of her size. Naval historian Mark Steeler, in his 2012 Osprey study of the Imperial Japanese Navy's battleships, calculates that the Yamato consumed approximately 6 tons of fuel oil per mile traveled. Fact number 4, the Iowa was the first ship ever fired upon by a United States Navy vessel in an act later attributed to friendly fire on November 14, 1943, while carrying President Franklin D. Roosevelt to the Tehran Conference. The destroyer William D. Porter accidentally fired a live torpedo at the Iowa. The torpedo was detonated by small arms fire before it reached the ship. This incident is fully documented in the official Naval Historical Center records and was declassified decades after the war. Fact number 5, neither the Yamato nor any Iowa-class battleship ever fired their main guns at another battleship in combat. The era of battleship versus battleship surface engagements, the purpose for which both ships were designed, never materialized for either vessel. Both classes spent the war performing roles their designers had not fully anticipated. Part 2. The world that built these ships, the Washington Naval Treaty and its consequences too. Understand why the Yamato and the Iowa were built. You must first understand why they almost were not built at all. In 1922, the major naval powers of the world, the United States, Britain, Japan, France, and Italy, signed the Washington Naval Treaty. The treaty imposed strict limits on the total tonnage of capital ships each nation could possess, and it capped the displacement of any individual battleship at 35,000 standard tons. For over a decade, no new battleships were laid down by any of the major signatories. Japan withdrew from the treaty system in 1934. The Second London Naval Treaty of 1936 included an escalator clause. If any non-signatory nation built a ship exceeding the agreed limits, the treaty's displacement ceiling could be raised. Japan's refusal to sign triggered that clause. The United States Navy began planning what would become the Iowa class in 1938, under the authority granted by the Naval Act of 1938, also known as the Second Vinson Act. The act authorized the construction of 2 new capital ships, and design work began immediately. The Iowa was laid down at the New York Navy Yard on June 27, 1940. Japan's decision to build the Yamato, Japan's naval leadership, particularly Admiral Osamu Nagano and the Naval General Staff, concluded in the mid-1930s that Japan could not match the United States in total battleship numbers. The United States had a larger industrial base and could simply outbuild Japan over time. The Japanese response was to build a smaller number of ships that were individually superior to anything the United States could deploy. The design that emerged, designated A-140, called for a ship of 69,000 tons full-load displacement, armed with 18.1-inch guns, the largest naval guns ever mounted on a warship. The theory was that a ship armed with guns of this caliber could engage American battleships at ranges at which American guns could not effectively reply. This concept, known in Japanese strategic planning as the Doctrine of Qualitative Superiority, is documented in the records of the Imperial Japanese Navy's Technical Bureau, portions of which were translated and published in the post-war series compiled by the United States Naval Technical Mission to Japan. Completed in 1946, the Yamato was laid down at the Kure Naval Arsenal on November 4, 1937, and commissioned on December 16, 1941, 9 days after the attack on Pearl Harbor. Part 3. What these ships were. The Yamato. Technical profile. The Yamato displaced 65,000 tons at standard load and approximately 72,800 tons at full load. She was 863 feet long, with a beam of 127 feet. Her maximum design speed was 27 knots, achieved during sea trials in October 1941. Her main battery consisted of 9 18.1-inch guns mounted in 3 triple turrets. Each gun weighed approximately 162 tons. Each shell weighed approximately 3,200 pounds, about the weight of a modern automobile. The maximum range of these guns was approximately 45,000 yards, or roughly 25.5 miles. When firing at maximum elevation, the armor protection of the Yamato was designed around the concept of resisting shells, fired at ranges between 22,000 and 32,000 yards. The main belt armor was 16 inches thick at its maximum. The main turret faces were 26 inches thick. The armored deck over the machinery spaces was 9 inches thick at its maximum. These figures are drawn from the post-war analysis conducted by the United States Naval Technical Mission to Japan, Document 001, titled Japanese Naval Vessels, Battleships, published in 1946, and from the detailed technical drawings captured by Allied forces after the war's end. The Iowa class. Technical profile. The Iowa displaced 44,860 tons at standard displacement and 57,540 tons at full load. She was 887 feet long, 24 feet longer than the Yamato. Her beam was 108 feet, constrained by the Panama Canal locks. Her maximum speed was 32.5 knots, verified during sea trials. This made the Iowa class the fastest battleships ever built by the United States Navy, and faster than the Yamato by approximately 5.5 knots. This speed advantage is noted in the Iowa's original sea trial reports, copies of which are held at the National Archives. The Iowa's main battery consisted of 9 16-inch guns mounted in 3 triple turrets. Her guns fired shells of approximately 2,700 pounds, lighter than the Yamato's. But the Iowa's superior fire control systems, including the Mark 38 gunfire control system with the Mark 13 radar, gave her a significant advantage in accuracy at long range. The Iowa's armor protection scheme was designed around the all-or-nothing principle that American naval architects had adopted since the early 1920s. Vital areas were protected by heavy armor. Non-vital areas received little or none. The main belt ranged from 12.25 inches at its maximum. Part 4. What these ships actually did. 1941-1945, the Yamato in the Pacific War. The Yamato's combat record is characterized by a recurring pattern. She was present at major engagements, but often played a secondary or passive role. At the Battle of Midway in June 1942, the Yamato served as the flagship of Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto's main body, a force of battleships that remained several hundred miles behind the carrier striking force. The Japanese carrier force was destroyed by American carrier-based aircraft before the main body could engage. The Yamato never fired her main battery during the entire Midway operation. This is documented in the action reports, translated in Gordon Prange's archival research, and published in the official Japanese war history. The Senshi Sosho, the Battle of the Sibuyan Sea on October 24, 1944, was the first occasion on which the Yamato engaged American forces in any significant way. As part of Admiral Takeo Kurita's center force transiting toward Leyte Gulf, the Yamato and the accompanying battleships were attacked repeatedly by American carrier aircraft. The Yamato was struck by 2 bombs, causing flooding and a temporary list. The battleship Musashi, the Yamato's sister ship, was sunk after being struck by approximately 19 torpedoes and 17 bombs. The Yamato survived and continued toward Leyte Gulf. The Battle off Samar on October 25, 1944, came closest to realizing the Yamato's designed purpose. Kurita's force, including the Yamato, encountered a group of American escort carriers and their destroyer escorts. A far weaker force than the Yamato was designed to fight. In the engagement that followed, the Yamato fired her main battery in anger for the first time in the war. She did not sink any major American warships. Kurita eventually withdrew. The action is documented in detail in Thomas Cutler's The Battle of Leyte Gulf and in the official United States Navy action reports from the engagement. The Yamato's final mission came in April 1945. Operation 10 Go, ordered by the Naval General Staff, sent the Yamato loaded with only enough fuel for a one-way voyage toward Okinawa. She was to beach herself and fight as a shore battery. On April 7, 1945, she was intercepted by approximately 380 American carrier aircraft. She was struck by approximately 11 torpedoes and 6 bombs and sank northwest of Kyushu. Of her crew of approximately 3,332 men, approximately 2,747 were killed. These casualty figures are drawn from Japanese post-war survivor accounts compiled in the Yamato Memoir Project and documented in the official Japanese naval histories. The Iowa class in the Pacific War. The Iowa-class battleships entered service in 1943 and were employed primarily in a role their designers had not fully anticipated. Fast Carrier Escort, the fast carrier task forces that became the primary offensive instrument of American naval power in the Pacific, required a screening force capable of keeping pace with fleet carriers operating at 25 to 30 knots. The older American battleships, the rehabilitated Pearl Harbor survivors, and the North Carolina and South Dakota classes were adequate for many tasks, but not fast enough to serve as carrier escorts in high-speed operations. The Iowa class, with a design speed of 32.5 knots, filled this role. The Iowa spent much of 1943 and early 1944 in the Atlantic, assigned to protect convoys and to escort President Roosevelt's voyage to the Tehran Conference in November 1943. She transferred to the Pacific in January 1944. In the Pacific, the Iowa and New Jersey served as flagships for various task force commanders and provided anti-aircraft fire protection for the carrier groups. Their 16-inch guns were also used for shore bombardment operations in support of amphibious landings, including operations at Kwajalein, Eniwetok, and later at Iwo Jima and Okinawa. The Iowa-class battleships never fought another battleship. The surface engagement for which they were designed, the classic line of battle duel between capital ships, never occurred. The last battleship versus battleship engagement in history had taken place at the Battle of Surigao Strait on October 24 to 25, 1944, and the American ships that participated in that action were older, slower vessels of the Pearl Harbor Force, not the Iowa class. Part 5. Why aircraft carriers replaced battleships. The argument made by events, displacement of the battleship by the aircraft carrier was not a theoretical argument won in strategic planning offices. It was an argument made by events. Beginning on December 10, 1941, 3 days after Pearl Harbor. On that day, Japanese land-based aircraft operating from Indochina found the British battleship Prince of Wales and the battlecruiser Repulse operating off the coast of Malaya. Both ships were sunk within 2 hours. It was the first time in history that capital ships operating underway at sea, not sitting in harbor, had been sunk by air attack alone. The loss of the Prince of Wales and Repulse is documented in the official British inquiry, conducted by the Admiralty in 1942, and in the post-war account by Captain Stephen Roskill in the War at Sea. The Battle of Midway in June 1942 confirmed what the sinking of the Prince of Wales had suggested. 4 Japanese fleet carriers, the Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, were sunk by American carrier-based dive bombers over the course of a single day. The Japanese surface fleet, including the Yamato, could not intervene. The carriers on both sides found each other and destroyed each other before the battleships ever closed to gun range. The structural reason for this outcome was range. A carrier's aircraft could strike targets at a distance of over 200 miles in 1942. A battleship's guns could reach targets at a maximum of roughly 25 miles. A battleship could be sunk long before it could bring its guns to bear on a carrier. This range asymmetry made the aircraft carrier the dominant offensive weapon and reduced the battleship to a supporting role. The fuel problem and the problem of exposure beyond the range asymmetry, there was the problem of what it cost to keep a battleship in the fight. The Yamato, as noted by historian Mark Steele and confirmed in the records of the Japanese Naval General Staff, translated after the war, consumed fuel at a rate that Japan's oil-constrained economy could not sustain for extended operations. Japan had seized the oil fields of the Dutch East Indies precisely to fuel its military. But the combination of Allied submarine warfare against tankers and the sheer consumption of its heaviest ships made sustained battleship operations increasingly impossible as the war continued. The Yamato's final mission was sent with a one-way fuel load, not primarily as a symbolic gesture, though it became one, but because Japan literally could not afford the fuel for a round trip. This is documented in the operational orders for Tengo preserved in the Japanese Defense Agency's War History Archives and summarized in H.P. Wilmot's The Battle of Leyte Gulf, published in 2005. The American Iowa class did not face the same fuel constraints, but it faced the same exposure problem. In a world where aircraft could find and destroy surface ships at ranges far exceeding gun range, the most powerful surface combatant in the world could not protect itself from the air without fighter cover. And fighter cover meant carriers, which meant the battleships needed carriers more than the carriers needed battleships. The formal acknowledgement, United States Navy formally acknowledged the changed status of the battleship in the General Board's report of 1945, which concluded that the primary capital ship of future naval warfare would be the aircraft carrier, and that battleships would serve in a supporting capacity. This represented a complete reversal of the doctrine that had governed naval planning for the previous 4 decades. The Iowa herself was decommissioned in 1949, reactivated for the Korean War in 1951, decommissioned again in 1958, reactivated once more in 1984 as a platform for Tomahawk cruise missiles and 16-inch shore bombardment, and finally decommissioned permanently in 1990. She is currently preserved as a museum ship in San Pedro, California. No ship of the Yamato class survived the war. Conclusion: the end of the Dreadnought Era. The Dreadnought Era, the period from HMS Dreadnought's commissioning in 1906 through the end of World War II, lasted less than 40 years. It produced warships of extraordinary size, cost and engineering sophistication, and it ended not because those ships failed at what they were designed to do, but because what they were designed to do became irrelevant. The Yamato and the Iowa represent the absolute limit of what the Dreadnought concept could produce, the largest, most heavily armed and most heavily armored surface combatants in history. They were rendered strategically secondary, not by enemy battleships, but by aircraft operating from carriers, and by the submarines that strangled Japan's ability to keep her heavier ships fueled and at sea. Neither ship ever fought the engagement for which it was designed. In that sense, They are monuments not only to the pinnacle of naval engineering, but to the strategic obsolescence that overtook that engineering before either ship had fired a shot in anger.